The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
Back to the EBRD outlook that we have mentioned in the beginning, David. According to the International Financial Institution, inflationary pressures have been increasing since the beginning of the year, and the rate of inflation reached 12.3% year-on-year in September 2021 on the back of higher international food and oil prices and pass-through of last year's depreciation. The National Bank of Georgia reacted by increasing the refinancing rate 3 times in 2021 by a cumulative 2 percentage points to the 10% in August 2021. On the basis of strong growth in the first 8 months of 2021, the economy is expected to grow by 7.5% in 2021. The gradual return of tourism could support growth prospects in 2022, projected at 5.5% growth. The main risks stem from the slow vaccine uptake, the future path of the pandemic, and possible travel restrictions, as well as increased political volatility, the EBRD noted in its report. Earlier, the IMF released its outlook, where Georgia ranks 16th globally and second in South Caucasus region with the highest inflation rate. Both the International Monetary Fund, in our exclusive interview, and the National Bank of Georgia during the Monetary Committee sitting responded to this development. In October 2021, the annual inflation rate in Georgia amounted to 12.8%, which hit a record high for the last 10 years. This is what the Geostat official figures tell us. If we look at the annual core inflation, the prices increased by 6.3%, while the annual core inflation without tobacco amounted to 6.2%. Today, according to the IMF World Economic Outlook, Georgia ranks 16th in the world as per high inflation and second in the South Caucasus region. Here is how Jihad Azur, responsible for CCA region at the IMF, analyzes inflation trend for Georgia. You say that for Georgia in 2021, the inflation will be somewhere around 13%. And then you say that starting from 2022, it will gradually come down to 3.17%, right? What should happen for such say sharp decline?
Well, as you know, inflation is global due to increase in food and commodity prices. We expect after the peak of 2021 that inflation will gradually globally normalize. Of course, this requires from monetary authorities, central banks, to avoid de-anchoring of inflation expectations by maintaining appropriate level of interest rate and, when needed, increase interest rates in order to address the risk of spillover or the risk of de-anchoring of inflation expectations. And this is what the central bank in Georgia and in some other countries in the region have introduced in the last few months. If inflation is to become more challenging, additional measures would be needed.
What do you mean under additional measures?
Well, it depends on the nature of the inflation and the risks of the inflations. Those could be met on the monetary side through interest rate, as well as also through the normal policy measures that are usually at the disposal of authority.
President of the National Bank, Kobak Venedadze, tells us that high inflation is very bad, but it is impossible to do something that will reduce inflation very soon. Kobak Venedadze urges everyone to take into account those factors that stand behind the leading positions in Georgia's high inflation ranking in the region and globally.
We often hear the remarks that inflation in Georgia is second high in the region and globally it stands number 16 with high inflation rate. But I would urge those who focus their attention on the statistic to also consider that Georgia is dependent on tourism, and because the pandemic has thoroughly restricted mobility, such types of countries have even more aggravated impact on inflation levels. Just to remind you, while in 2019 tourism contributed 12% to the overall GDP in the country, in 2020 this fell to 2%. So the shock for Georgia is a bigger shock compared to many other countries. Let us not forget that in Georgia fiscal deficit that was high in 2020 and it's maintained this year as well. So when we say that the inflation in Georgia is one of the high, yes, it's so, but this has its preconditions.
The annual inflation rate was mainly influenced by price changes for the following groups. Food and non-alcoholic beverages, the prices in the group increased by 18.4%. Transport, the prices increased by 19.6%. Housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels, the prices for the group posted an increase of 11.9%. And health, the prices went up by 8.4%. All these groups have the biggest share in the out-of-pocket payments of Georgian citizens. So while Georgia, according to the IMF World Economic Outlook again, ranks 106th globally on GDP per capita, even the smallest increase in these prices affects household incomes negatively, not to say anything about the record-breaking inflation that Georgia hasn't seen in a decade.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.